live, but it's going to be available on the website. So, good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the meeting of the Trustees Subcommittee. I am Councillor Andrew Hornsby-Smith, and I'm chair of this subcommittee. I do apologise. We're having to meet in committee room 4 this evening, as the council chamber is currently closed for the installation of new audio-visual, which is going to be very welcome, and webcasting equipment, which will be available for committee meetings in the new municipal year. The audio-visual facilities in here are a bit more limited, with a single room microphone on the desk, that's somewhere over there, and an automated camera under the screen, which will try and follow anyone speaking. We are not able to manually control the camera, so please note that your image may be captured. Therefore, by entering the meeting room, you are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting. The meeting will be recorded via Microsoft Teams and, subject to any technical problems, uploaded to the council's website tomorrow. So there's a couple of, just to start the agenda then, there's a couple of announcements that I need to make. First of all, Councillor Brock is going to attend the meeting online, and he's there ready to come in. I have apologies from Councillor McCann. So that's the chair's announcements. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have an introduction to the reviews that we're going to be covering in this report, the reviews of outside bodies and Maple Durham Plainfields Management Committee. So I'd like to ask Michael Popham to introduce.
Thank you, Chair.
This report.
The background to the outside bodies review goes back to the Policy Committee at its meeting on the 12th of June 2023, which authorised the Trustees Subcommittee to conduct a review of the appointments and nominations to outside bodies and report back with recommendations. This report briefly introduces the context and scope of the review, which included a questionnaire being completed by councillors during the autumn. Findings of the review inform the recommendations, which are set out in a separate report later on the agenda. The appointments of councillors to the Maple Durham Plainfields Management Committee has been excluded from the wider review due to the subcommittee's specific role as trustee for the Maple Durham Plainfields, and is dealt with as another separate report on the agenda. Generally, the council makes appointments annually to outside bodies at the annual council meeting in May and Policy Committee in June. It is important to periodically review our links and relationships with outside bodies and establish whether the appointment is still appropriate or the best way to deliver support to the organisation. Where the council appoints to joint committees, council-owned and other companies, national and regional membership organisations, partnership bodies and NHS partner organisations, the role of the council's representative is generally clearly defined, and the council's interest and obligation in participating is fairly evident. The review therefore concentrates on the category of voluntary and community sector and local organisations. In the absence of a sort of formal rationale to which bodies the council appoints to and on what basis, the current list of appointments has developed sort of piecemeal over quite a long period. The review therefore seeks to establish a clearer and more consistent approach to appointments to outside bodies and ensure that the ongoing arrangements contribute to the priorities set out in the corporate plan and are beneficial to both the council and the external organisation. And you're basically asked to note that report.
Thank you very much. Does anybody wish to say anything about this report? I'd just like to say that I think it is, sorry, yes, Rachel, after you.
Thank you, Councillor Hornsby-Smith. So I, as someone who's been around for a while on some of these outside bodies, I think it's really timely that we've reviewed this because, as Policy Committee agreed, some of these bodies really benefit from the council involvement and they're an important part of our strategic aims, but others, they may have previously done so, but things have changed over time. And I think it's important also that our voluntary sector are aware of the rationale, because you can have very worthy organisations that don't have a councillor representative, and similarly worthy representations that organisations that do have that representation. So I think it would be impossible for us to have a council representative on all the organisations that work with the council. So I think having it a more manageable number means that it's where it's really strategically relevant. And I think we'll be discussing it more under item 5 on the specifics, but I think that general strategic approach is the right one. So.
And I would agree. Does anybody else want to say anything? I would just say this is a report for noting. I think it's really useful that we're coming to this post-COVID when things have shaken up a bit and we get that opportunity to do a proper review. So we'll come to that later on the agenda, but the report is for noting. Can I see those in favour of noting the report? Thank you very much. Okay, we move on to item 4, which is the amendment to the Maple Durham Playing Fields Management Committee's Terms of Reference and Charity Scheme. Now, Eliza Miles, would you like to address the committee just come and join us a bit. Yes, come a bit closer so we can all hear. And you're very welcome. Thank you for coming.
So
you've got about 5 minutes.
No problem. Thank you for the opportunity to express concerns and communicate opportunities provided by the Management Committee and its volunteer organizations. I respect that for many councillors, the management of a charitable trust may be unfamiliar and the requirement to put the interests of an effective and sustainable trust first, but I hope to make the case for this and show that this would also be beneficial for Reading Borough Council. In recent years, unease has risen concerning the management of the trust capital assets and its lack of growth, as well as the lack of actions to reduce divisiveness in the community. The Management Committee is plagued with slow decision-making and uptake of actions, disconnected communications, and conflict of interests. During the last 2 years, we have been working to reverse at least some of this by more frequent and shorter meetings and engaging with stakeholders to address issues faced by the trust and its users, but progress is slow. In my letter of March 4th to Mr. Hornsby Smith, I have outlined some suggested Management Committee changes to increase its effectiveness and the trustees' ear to the ground and the beneficiaries' local guardian of the objectives of the charity. Of those suggestions, a few stand out as most impactful in the short term for the better collaboration of the Management Committee, beneficiaries, the trustees, and the council. Those include reducing the number of councillors to 1 and the inclusion of the Friends of Maple Durham playing fields who manage the flora and the fauna at the trust. Look to have a secretary provided from the member organizations. Identify and agree solutions for better management and issue resolution, increase revenue, and decrease costs. Review and implement hire fees that include the use of the playing fields for businesses, private hires, and fundraising not benefiting the trust. Ensure a strong and informative as well as an actionable line of communication between the trustees, Management Committee, and the beneficiaries and the users. The aim of the Management Committee members is to represent the beneficiaries and achieve more transparency between this committee and the Management Committee to achieve a reduction in costs for Reading Borough Council to maintain the fields, pavilion, and car park by ensuring the trust's financial sustainability, increasing income, and again, reducing costs incurred. To ensure that the trust capital assets at approximately 181,000 are invested, grow, and used to ensure the sustainability of the trust. A quick calculation indicates approximately £9,000 interest should be accounted for the 2023-24 accounts. We've not yet seen this in the accounts, but are confident that it will be included. To ensure the preservation and protection of the trust, working collaboratively to establish a fit-for-purpose deed of dedication as promised by Reading Borough Council that instills confidence that the trust is protected from further development. When reviewing Reading Borough Council's proposed changes to the Management Committee, I agree that reduction of costs is imperative for the Council, but severing communication between the trustees, the Management Committee, and the beneficiaries and users, as well as removing an officer from a related department, will only put a greater burden on Reading Borough Council, slow the management of the trust, and incur unnecessary costs. Maple Durham Playing Fields is unique in that it has so many organizations that are devoted to the presentation of the trust. It includes Warren and District Residents Association, Caversham Trents Football Club, Maple Durham Lawn Tennis Club, and Friends of Maple Durham Playing Fields, as well as ensuring that it remains an asset for all of its beneficiaries and users. I believe with some changes, the management committee can be a more efficient and effective force for the trust, reducing costs and increasing revenue, as well as ensure its smooth and successful running, its protection, and a reduction of some of the existing friction across a number of parties. We look forward to discussing these issues in a collaborative manner and coming to solutions that benefit all parties and protect the trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask Mike Graham if you'd like to introduce the report and context.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the report which is before members tonight is basically something which has arisen from that wider review which is being talked about in relation to the attendance of councillors in relation to the Maple Durham Playing Fields Management Committee. Whereas in a lot of circumstances which have been outlined and which are detailed in the papers this evening, the council is able to come to a decision about its attendance at a number of other outside bodies, or to make requests to the outside bodies themselves to review the councillors' attendance. Then the Maple Durham Playing Fields, as the speakers alluded to, is unique in its sense that it has a charity scheme, and the charity scheme was revised fairly recently in order to make provision for 3 councillors to attend on the management committee. Now, should the trustee committee decide that it agrees with the recommendation that that's not necessary in order for there to be a functioning management committee, then obviously some formal change is required to the scheme in order to allow that to take place. So that's the reason we came to have a look at this scheme and the driver behind the change to the terms of reference in the Charity Commission scheme. However, there were some other matters outlined in the scheme which I thought inadvisable and probably should not have been included in the original scheme and the terms of reference, because particularly in relation to fee setting, the job of the council, whether it's acting as the council or as a trustee, its function is to determine fees and charges for the facilities and services which it provides under whatever auspices. And that's not something which can be delegated to an outside body or a management committee. So I thought that that was inadvisable. I think that the role of the management committee in those circumstances is certainly to provide advice to the trustees of the committee and probably through the officers of the council about how it sees fees and charges working and the optimum way in which the speaker has alluded to this evening, the optimum way in which things can be organised at the playing fields in order to make sure that they're appropriately used and enjoyed by the users, because obviously they are the beneficiaries of the trust, and the trustee has to be mindful at all times that it is trying to achieve the aims of the trust and abide by the charity scheme overall. So set out in the papers tonight are some amendments to the scheme in terms of reference, which will give effect to that. I just also wanted to mention that, and it's not related to the formal review of the terms of reference, the membership and the scheme, though in reviewing this matter, it did become clear that the management committee had quite a lot of resource going to it from the council in terms of the support which was being provided through an officer from committee services and Mr. Stainsby, who's here this evening. And that is quite unique. It's probably been a feature of the fact that there was a significant development on the site. There's quite a lot of activity on the playing fields and quite a lot of discussion which needed to be had. And the powers of the trustees subcommittee were for a time somewhat controversial, because the scheme which was built out there in terms of the high school and the whole redevelopment of the site and the pavilion was clearly a matter of concern to the community at that period of time. So I think the amount of council resource which was being devoted to the management committee is just probably a reflection of the history of where we've come to. However, because it is so out with the kind of support which we provide to any other similar kind of organisation, it's mentioned in the report that we would be intending to scale that back. That does mean then that the implication for the management committee is it has to be more self-sustaining. It will have to sort of organise its own affairs and work out how it will best relate back to the council through the officers in order to be able to carry on that kind of dialogue and discussion and feedback to the trustees subcommittee that the speaker has mentioned this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graham. Thank you. I see Jason, Councillor Brock, you'd like to come in at this point.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry I'm not there in person. Always good to hear representation from members of the community as well. Look, I think the council acting as trustee is one of the very most complicated things that the council does in legal terms, and so we have to take a bit of time to get our heads around it. But what is clear is that when we're acting as trustee, we have to act in the interests of the beneficiaries, which are the residents of the Borough of Reading and the parish of Maple Durham. And so it's quite right that we would have a look at the governance arrangements that exist around Maple Durham playing fields, just as a matter of course anyway. And I think what is proposed here and the amendments are entirely right and appropriate. And I would really hope that it allows us to continue moving forward with a strong and actually probably a slightly stronger relationship between the trustees subcommittee acting as representative of the council as trustee, but not as the trustee itself, and the Maple Durham Playing Field Management Committee. I think we can have a good relationship that moves forward and allows us to each properly discharge the functions that are assigned to us, and sorting out that ambiguity around the fees and charges seems especially important. Now, setting aside the council corporate as trustee, when we think about the council corporate as council for the Borough of Reading, we also have to be equitable in the way that we distribute resource. And it seems entirely sensible, therefore, that we should not be over-resourcing the management committee at Maple Durham Playing Fields relative to the kind of support that we offer for comparable organisations elsewhere in the borough, being cognizant also that, as with all local authorities, we have severe capacity constraints on the things that we can do as a result of financial resourcing pressures. So I think what's being proposed, this new way of working, is entirely appropriate, will be really good, and is in no way a criticism of the work of the Maple Durham Playing Fields Management Committee, but rather an acknowledgement of the fact that some of the ways in which that was set up initially have probably just been a little bit wrong. So an opportunity for us to have a bit of a reset, move things forward, and of course, ensure that there's some good reporting that comes back through this subcommittee or via policy committee as appropriate, and allows the playing fields to be continued to be managed in the interests of the residents of Reading and Maple Durham, which is at the end of the day what we're here to achieve. So really welcome the report. Sorry that because I'm not physically present I can't vote for it, but I really look forward to watching the rest of you put your hands up at the relevant moment. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Brock. Councillor Reed, I know you wanted to come in.
I did, and thank you. And I'm not actually going to repeat what Councillor Brock said. I'm an accountant specialising in charity work in my day job, so I'm well aware of the importance of trustees, and while it's unusual to have a corporate trustee, it's by no means unique in the country. It's not an exceptional position that we're in that sense. I think it was really helpful to hear the report, the speech from the management committee. So I don't know your surname, otherwise I'd refer
Miles.
to Ms. Miles. And actually a lot of the things that she suggested were things that I think are reflective in this report. And for example, one thing I thought was particularly something that I was questioning when I looked at this report was the resource for sort of secretarial role, but it's great to hear that the management committee organisations think they've got the resources to provide that, and I think that reflects the maturity of the organisation and hopefully the development of the relationship. Councillor Brock's outlined some things about tidying up and making sure that we're doing everything properly. I think one of the concerns that I heard there was around kind of ensuring communication, positive relationship, and getting things done effectively, which is what we all want. You know, as representatives of the trustee, you know, we need to be mindful of that. And I think that's looking at the operational side rather than the scheme. I think you can't really mandate that in a constitution. You have to look at how things operate. So actually, you know, I would think, for example, officer time is better spent on, for example, working on the park itself, the playing fields itself, rather than attending every single management committee meeting. Our officers have a cost associated with them, and their time, you know, needs to be judged as to what the appropriate use of that time is. So I think we should be looking on behalf of the trustee and with the management committee at how we develop things on an operational basis to ensure that we have good communication going forward. I think that trying to write it into the Charity Commission scheme is never a good thing because you want a bit of flexibility with those schemes. You don't generally, with most charities that I've come across, change these schemes very often. So it's good to have it in a more you know, operational working approach rather than trying to write it into the Charity Commission scheme.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to speak at this point? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I find myself slightly torn on this in that I am concerned about the total lack of councillor membership on the management committee. I think given the integral role that the management committee plays within that particular ward and the history as Michael Graham has outlined, I think it's important that there is at least one councillor member, in my view, and the proposal from Eliza, I think, is a sensible one as a compromise. On the question of officer support, though, it is unique and quite right, I would say, in terms of cost cutting and sensible use of council resources for the wider good of the borough. I would have no issue with that proposal within the report. The other outside bodies that I or my colleagues sit on doesn't have that. So I'm not sure why MPF should have it other than the historic situation it finds itself in. But my concern is more about representation. I think at least one ward councillor should be present on it. So I'm minded to vote against tonight purely on that aspect alone.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Lanzoni.
No, I point to Councillor Brock.
Councillor Brock, do you want to come back?
Yeah, only briefly, Chair. Although I understand the point that Councillor Mitchell is making, we should acknowledge the fact that this would not apply to any other park in Reading. You know, I've been a ward councillor in Southcote for a period of time now. I've never once sat on a management committee for Prospect Park, which I think is probably just as important in the life of Southcote as the Maple Durham playing fields are in the life of Caversham Heights. And that's right, that's appropriate, that's fine, because actually we have the opportunity as councillors, just as all of the ward councillors will do, to have the right and the requisite proper input into this. You know, it's entirely right, entirely appropriate, having consulted with the local ward councillors who do not wish to be represented on the management committee, that we would remove them from it. And of course, they continue to have the opportunity to go along, attend the meetings, do their job as representatives of all of their residents in their ward without having to feel constrained in some cases, as they have done, by being a member of the management committee itself. So I think it's a really good resolution, actually. And although I can understand conceptually where Councillor Mitchell is coming from, I think in practice what's being proposed is entirely the right thing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak at this point? I'd like to make a few comments and responses to some of that. There is nothing in the report which suggests that ward councillors cannot attend these meetings, but it's by invitation. And it's not by appointment. I think what this report is setting out is the management responsibility of this committee as the trustees subcommittee to oversee in a general sense and to remove the burden on 3 local councillors to take decisions about charges, which is not representative of what happens elsewhere in the borough. So there's nothing to stop local councillors being invited along to the committees, but the decision-making body, in terms of representing the council as trustees, what this report is setting out is that it's this committee and indirectly policy committee as well, in terms of setting the parameters. The other thing I'd like to say is that I think what has come out through the discussion is that there's been an enormous amount of positivity in terms of developing the relationship and making sure that we do get that balance right. We can't have a sort of inconsistent situation where, you know, as Councillor Brock was saying, in one part of Reading we've got one kind of management arrangement, and in this part of Reading we've got another kind of arrangement, and that arrangement is one which takes, you know, really important decisions which are not reflected in the rest of Reading. The council has to have control over that ultimately. So I would like to propose the recommendation that we go ahead with the recommendation on the paper, which is that the proposed new paragraph 5 for the Charity Commission scheme on the Committee of Management, Appendix 1, and proposed new Maple Durham Management Committee terms of reference, Appendix 2, be approved. Can I see all those in favour? All those against? Thank you very much. Okay. So moving on, we go to agenda item 5, which is about outside bodies. Simon, if you'd like to take us through that.
Thank you, Chair. As referred to in the introduction, this review was commissioned by the Policy Committee when it made these appointments last year, and any recommendations made by the subcommittee this evening will be submitted to Policy Committee with the annual outside body report in June. In consultation with the subcommittee chair and vice chair, it was agreed to focus on appointments to voluntary sector and independent local organisations, and that the aims of the review would be to firstly check whether the council's representatives were actively involved in these organisations, to find out whether there's insurance and other support in place for them to carry out their role, to consider whether and how the organisations contribute to the council's priorities as set out in the corporate plan, and to consider whether the arrangements are still beneficial to both the organisation and the council. As Michael briefly referred to, a questionnaire was sent to all councillors who were appointed to these bodies, and the responses were reviewed by the chair and vice chair, and with some additional research used to formulate the review findings and recommendations. Appendix 1 to the report on pages 37 and 38 of the agenda summarises the findings of the review, with a recommendation for each organisation to either continue making appointments or to stop and remove it from our schedule. There are a few remaining loose ends, so we're asking for a delegation for officers to contact those organisations and submit any additional recommendations to Policy Committee alongside those agreed this evening. Where the recommendation is to stop making appointments, it is recognised that the organisation itself may want to continue and be willing to adjust the role to address any concerns that members may have. So one of the recommendations is a delegation to the monitoring officer to consider any representations in consultation with the leader and to make appointments mid-year if appropriate. The review highlighted some concerns among members about issues such as conflicts of interest and personal liability. In future, outside bodies will be asked to confirm insurance arrangements for representatives upon their appointment to a formal role such as trustee or director. In addition, the guidance for council representatives and outside bodies, which covers issues such as conflicts of interest, will be updated and reissued to all representatives, and an annual member briefing is proposed. The review also highlighted some other improvements we can make to the procedures around outside bodies, and those are set out in the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lanton.
Thank you, Chair. As a relatively young councillor, I just wanted to share some opinions and reflections on this report, which also can be applied to the other matters we have discussed earlier today. I've been your colleagues for only 2 years, but it is clear how important the role of community groups is. Many of us, like myself, have arrived to the council being a member of a community group or exactly because of their engagement with a community group. Obviously, as we were elected as councillors, we started receiving email from other community groups we had never heard of until a few months before. And we get to know many communities through our casework. A lot we learn through the reports we elaborate and scrutinize, because Reading Borough Council does work in partnership with many important groups in Reading. And then there are the outside bodies, which is yet another way for us to be injected into other micro communities. Like I'm lucky to have been appointed as trustee of Redibus, which is like you, Chair. I must admit I didn't know Redibus before I was elected, and I saw its name in the paper, and then I decided to put my name forward for it. So it is clear how, you know, Reading is not really a community. It's a set of communities, a set of community groups, a little bit like circles which overlapped each other. Sometimes they overlap even too much. We go to meetings of different organizations and it's always some of us, right? And it's extremely important, and pardon the semi-pun, being in the right circles, as in it is really important that as councillors we constantly review what are the communities where we want in those years to engage, considering the powers and what the strategy of the council, because groups, they are born, they execute a function, they die, they are recreated, they split, different groups, they merge together. So again, also reiterating some of the elements we have touched on before. This is not, at least in the way I read it and in the way I'm intending to support the measure, is not a way to cut down the amount of community groups that we as councillor and the council is engaging with, but is more a piece of a review that we will have to keep doing in the years to come, to be sure that as councillor we optimize the time we invest in this activity, providing the value to the groups, to the circles that they need it the most and we can benefit the most. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else wish to speak at this point? I'd like to wrap up. There's a couple of points that I think I'd like to add. I think both Simon and yourself, Councillor Lanzoni, mentioned the importance of these groups and you know, the importance and the opportunity we have post-COVID to review how we participate and how everything ties in. Some groups have faded, some groups have come into greater prominence. So it's appropriate that we review it periodically. I mean, I think that one of the things that is drawn out in the report is the different types of groups. So we've got the groups which have got borough-wide responsibilities, particularly those that receive funds from us or distribute funds. And then we've got a separate category, which is groups that provide a service borough-wide, and a third category, which is groups that have a local interest, which is nonetheless important for local communities. So it's important that we look at the expectations, and it's also important, one of the things that came out of the review is it's important that we have an opportunity for councillors to feed back. And so corporately, we learn more about these organisations at the end of each year, but also that councillors receive a slightly enhanced level of training and protection, because, you know, as we discussed, I've just joined the Redibus and I'm a director. So what does a director do? What is the role of a director? What if something goes wrong? You know, what is the exposure of councillors to personal liabilities and risks? So it's appropriate that when we're reviewing these and we're making recommendations to the policy committee, that we've taken on board what the results of the councillor questionnaires are. And we've also, as Mr. Hill was saying, we've also followed up with direct communication with some of these organisations. So I know personally that I've talked to Age UK or Age Berkshire or whatever it is, to see what we can do about what's an appropriate form of representation there. So this is a report that's gathered together all of that sort of information. I think it's very useful. We're only making a recommendation to Policy Committee, but I think it's a good report, and I think it's worth backing. So the recommendations that we've got are to take the proposed actions to continue or discontinue outside body appointments, to authorise the monitoring officer in consultation with the leader of the council to consider any requests during the year to make appointments as required, to agree that representatives be requested to report back, and you can read the rest of that section. Secondly, that officers be authorised to seek further information from outside bodies as set out in the appendix, where we, perhaps we haven't completed the review, it's an ongoing process, but also that the outside bodies guidance be refreshed for submission with the annual outside bodies report to Policy Committee, and that a briefing be offered to the appointed representatives. So is everybody, can I say a show of hands, those in support of the recommendations? I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. And that concludes the meeting tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
First time chairing anything.
You're a natural, Andrew.